What Ought I Do for Christ? By Mary Kate Ellis, read by Hannah Petrizzi. What is a Catholic soldier? Perhaps the first thing that comes to mind is the glorious Saint Michael, the commander of the heavenly armies, Saint Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, Saint Sebastian, Saint Longinus, or Saint George, all military soldiers at one point in their holy lives. Many saints were soldiers physically. All saints were soldiers spiritually. They slayed their worst vices for the glory of God and daily asked for the graces they needed to continue their ongoing battle against sin, carrying on their fights with admirable long-suffering and devotion to God. Through these accounts, we are reminded that all Catholics are called to be soldiers when we receive the sacrament of confirmation. In the first installation of this series, we will discuss one such saint who defended himself with the armor of meekness and the shield of heroic patience, finding solace in the faith. Though he was oftentimes in pain during his short life, he allowed his pain to teach him patience and trust in God's holy will. Heaven was his ultimate goal and reward. Saint Stanislaus Kostka was born on the 28th of October, 1550, in Raskowo, Poland. His parents were nobility, highly regarded by the king. Stanislaus was so frail at birth that he was immediately baptized for the fear that he would soon die, and was one of 7 children, though he spent most of his time with his elder brother Paul. It was originally from Paul that Stanislaus learned to make acts of virtue, while they were away from home, studying at a Jesuit college in Austria. However, over time, Stanislaus began to exceed Paul in the number and fervency of his acts of virtue. This frustrated Paul, and he turned to mistreatment of Stanislaus. Paul's anger was increased when he was met with saintly patience and kindness in return for each blow that he would cast upon his younger brother. Soon after Paul's abuse began, the boy's shared tutor began beating Stanislaus. This was usually spurred over things Stanislaus hadn't done that Paul had accused him of. Their tutor always believed the elder brother, and Stanislaus never defended himself. This mistreatment led to one of our saint's famous quotes, directed to his beloved brother. "Your rough treatment will end in my going away never to return, and you will have to explain my leaving to our father and mother." Unbeknownst to Paul, Stanislaus was planning on leaving to join the Jesuits. It was with patience that he accepted rejection from the Jesuits in Vienna, Austria, as they were frightened of taking the young boy from his father, who would have been outraged at the thought of his son becoming a religious. Instead, they recommended Stanislaus to the Jesuit seminary in Augsburg, Germany. This trip he planned to make on foot at the age of 16, a staggering 400 miles of that he would walk on his own for the love of God. He was pursued by his brother Paul and his tutor, both angry over his sudden departure, but he evaded them and eventually made it to Augsburg, where he stayed for some time with St. Peter Canisius, who put the young man's vocation to the test by employing him in a boarding school. From there he was sent to Rome, where he was eventually admitted into the novitiate of St. Andrew by St. Francis Borgia, despite his frail body and frequent sicknesses. It was said that the sickly boy could be no happier. He suffered from a mysterious burning pain in his chest and received visions and ecstasies while a novice. He was a Jesuit for only 10 months, and he died on the Feast of the Assumption, as he had requested of the Blessed Virgin, at 4 o'clock in the morning, praying as he passed into eternity. Saint Stanislaus was 17 years old at his death. He was seen as an ordinary boy and an exemplary religious. He was quiet, meek, obedient, and kind. How is it that he was a soldier? His supreme commander was God, his general his superior. His basic training was completed with his brother Paul and his tutor, who prepared him for a life of long suffering and meekness. He armed himself with the sacraments, with prayer, with virtue, and he fought with bravery against the devil with those weapons, unafraid to suffer bodily and spiritual pains in order to form a closer union with God. It is in a soldier like St. Stanislaus that we must examine the fruit of abandoning oneself to God. It is in a soldier like St. Stanislaus that we must examine the fruit of abandoning oneself to God, and that we can see how our spiritual warfare is necessary for the church militant to bring more souls close to God. His victory was peace in heaven, but his victories did not end with his death. Through his intercession, his family became soldiers like him. Impressed by his brother's humility and brief but quiet life as a religious, Paul Casca returned to the practice of the Catholic faith. He retired to the castle of Raskow with his widowed mother, spending the rest of his life quietly with her. Paul was present for the beatification of the brother whom he so loved and tried to imitate, and he spent the rest of his life performing penance in reparation for his cruel treatment of our young saint. His family members were not the only ones affected by this champion of Christian virtue. Along with them, we may note the conversion of the tutor that also tormented St. Stanislaus. Numerous testimonies were given by brothers and priests of the heroic virtue the saint possessed, but most of them noted that he was simply a quiet, simple religious. Ah, what a great love for God! What a great love for virtue! This gentle soldier prayed with love for his tormentors, longing to see them again in heaven. Can we say the same? Do we pray often for our enemies? Do we allow them to teach us patience, meekness, and temperance? St. Stanislaus did. In this young saint, we can find an example of every Christian virtue. But why? For love. This young boy loved God so much that he was given the opportunity to hold the child Jesus in his arms during a mystical vision, to receive communion from angels, and to have seen Our Lady. It is in this humble brother that we can see all the traits of a good soldier, intent on winning the battle for his soul. So then, let us ask St. Stanislaus for his intercession, that we may grow in virtue, that we may persevere in fighting the good fight, and that we may thirst for God, for heaven, and to grow in the love of God. Remember that no matter how old or young we may be, we are all called to be saints. Recall the words of our dear saint and say with him, "What have I done for Christ? What am I doing for Christ? What ought I do for Christ?"
You've been listening to the Catholic Family Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends and family. You can support the production on Patreon and PayPal, and you can reach Kevin at kevin89davis@gmail.com. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam, all for the greater glory of God.